Okay, right now we're going to talk about leveling the bed on your Ender 3 3D printer. So the idea with bed leveling, this is the bed, also sometimes called the build plate. And the idea with leveling it is that you want to have it be the same distance from the print nozzle, from the extrusion nozzle, at any point, any place in the X and Y direction. So you want to be able to move this around and have this distance right here from the build plate to the nozzle be the same, so that and the reason that's important is that your first layer, when you print it, the nozzle is going to be very close to the build plate, just a little bit above it. If it's too close, as it extrudes along the surface, there won't be any space for the filament to come out, and the filament will actually just jam up the nozzle, and it can fill up into this Bowden tube and cause you problems down the line, and you won't get a good print. If it's too high up, then it won't adhere, it won't stick, it won't sort of smush out and stick to the build plate, and in that case, your first layer won't stick to the build plate, and it'll just come off, and you'll have a failed print, and you'll get what we call spaghetti, just like little bits of plastic filament sort of gooing out all over the place. So ideally what you want is the nozzle to be just the right distance, so that a nice thin smooth bead of plastic can come out on the build plate, and I'll show you how we get that. Okay, so I've turned my Ender 3 on, and I've set the nozzle temperature to 200 and the bed temperature to 60. That heats up the build plate and the nozzle so that they're at the temperature they'll be at when they're printing. The reason we do that is because these things will expand and contract a little with heating and cooling, and so when you are leveling the nozzle to the bed, you want them to be at their hot temperature, which is the temperature they'll be at when they're printing. Okay, so the general theory here is there's 4 knobs. There's 1, 2, and then there's 3 and 4 in the back. These big black plastic wheels. And if you look underneath, there's these springs. It's sort of a spring-loaded system. And if I turn this wheel, and if I'm looking at it from above, it's clockwise. If I turn it clockwise, it's actually going to push the bed up a little bit. So, and the way I think of it is clockwise is lockwise. So clockwise is going to push the bed plate up and lock it into that nozzle. And if I turn it the other way, it goes down, okay? And I'm putting it right back about where it was. So that you can control all 4 corners of the plate, and by doing that you can change the level in the different directions. So what we'll do is we'll go over to our home screen. We'll click, we'll go down to prepare, and we'll go to auto home. And what that's going to do is going to bring the X and the Y and the Z to 0 using the limit switches, as we discussed in another video. It's nice bringing down the Z for that limit switch. And alright, there it is. Now there's just a little bit of filament coming out of the extruder, so I'm going to just use my clippers and pick that off. Now, if you look closely here, it's pretty good. It's pretty close to the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and click. I'm going to go to prepare, and I'm going to disable steppers. Okay? And now what that's going to allow me to do is I can move this build plate, and I can move this print head so that I can move it into the position where it's directly over the top of this wheel. And so if I go something like that, it's more or less directly over the wheel. And that looks pretty good by eye, but the way that you tell if it's at a good distance from the build plate is we slide a little piece of paper under it. Okay, this is just a standard piece of printer paper. I cut it in half just so it's a little less unwieldy, and we'll slide it underneath there, and it should just barely catch. You will get a sense for this, right? I can feel right now it's giving me just a little bit of resistance, and that's what it should be in all four corners, and ideally in the center too, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this is the way you're gonna adjust you're gonna test and you're gonna adjust your bed level in all four corners. And so what I'll do, I'll go like that, and if it seems a little loose, remember I'll go clockwise to tighten it, so I'll turn maybe a quarter of a turn, and now I can feel there's a lot of resistance. I can move it, but just barely, and I can't push it. If you see, if I try to push it, it just catches up. So that's a little too tight. So I'm going to go back maybe about 1/8 of a turn, and that feels pretty good. It's catching, but not exactly. So I can still move the paper in and out. So then what I'll do is I'll gently and carefully slide this over. Now, if it starts to hit the plate, I can actually just push the plate down a little with my hand to give it space. And then here it is over on the other side. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to try to put this paper underneath, slide this in there, and I can't even get it to go in. So that means I need to loosen it. So I'm going to loosen that up. All right. That was maybe a quarter turn. Okay, and now that feels pretty good. I've got a little bit of resistance, but I can still move the paper. Okay, and now I'm just going to do the same thing for the last two corners. And actually, I'll start in one corner and I'll go all the way around, and then once it's done, I'll actually go all the way around again. So I'm going to put it on time lapse because it's kind of a boring thing to watch, but you can watch me do it on time lapse. Okay, so that probably took me 3 or 4 minutes to do that. And I've discovered something which I knew already, but you may discover this on your printer as well. It's good in all four corners. It's just at the right height where I can slide a piece of paper under it and I can feel the resistance, but I can still push it back and forth. Now in the center here though, you'll see when it's leveled on the four corners, I really can't get that paper to slide underneath it. It's a little too close, and you can probably even see that on the camera. It's basically touching the plate. And because a lot of my prints are going to print right in the middle of that section, I really do want that to be just a little bit higher. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just back off all four corners equally, and I'll do about a quarter of a turn for all four of them. So that's a quarter, that's a quarter, that's a quarter, that's a quarter. Now, that was all even, and so theoretically, yep, it still needs a little more, so let's go another quarter of a turn. Quarter, 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 quarter. Now let's see. Oh yeah, now you can see, if you look, there's a little bit of space there. And now I can get the paper under, and I can feel there's a little bit of a drag, like a little bit of resistance, but that's pretty good. Now, of course, if I go back and test this corner, it'll seem too high, and this corner will seem too high. All the corners should now seem a little bit too high. Let's see what that looks like. For example, on this front left corner, it looks a little high. All right, and like I don't really get much resistance there. So this might be a problem if you need to print something really big and you need to print something on the whole surface, because it'll stick now it should stick pretty well in the center, but out on the edges it may not stick that well. So that's something to think about. You know, getting a flatter surface, maybe a glass surface or something like that, that's very flat, and then once you level it, it's level in all it's level in all 5 places. So that's leveling your bed, and we'll jump next onto starting a print and watching the first few layers of the print.